Either you take over my credit cards and stop digging into my spending, or we're done wasting time. She said it like a conclusion she'd already reached, not a discussion. Calm voice, arms crossed, like she was explaining a rule I'd somehow missed. We'd been living together for 3 years and combining money for almost two. Same checking account for bills, groceries, trips, separate personal cards, or so I thought. The ultimatum came after I asked a simple question about a late notice that showed up in our shared email folder by mistake. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her of anything. I just asked why a collections warning was addressed to her name. She sighed, rolled her eyes, and told me I was making a big deal out of nothing. Within the first 10 minutes, I found out it wasn't one card. It was four. Two personal, one store card I didn't know existed, and a line of credit she'd opened 6 months earlier. All maxed. All minimum payments late. All quietly floating in the background while we split rent, utilities, and groceries like everything was normal. I asked why I'd never heard about any of it. She said she didn't want to stress me out and that it was temporary. Then she pivoted fast. Said since I made a little more than her, it only made sense for me to help stabilize things. That if I really cared about our future, I'd step up instead of interrogating her like an accountant. That's when the tone shifted. She told me this was what commitment looked like, that couples don't nickel and dime each other, that if I didn't agree to take over her payments for a while, it told her everything she needed to know about me. I asked how much we were talking about. She pulled up her phone and showed me a total that made my stomach drop. 5 figures. Not medical, not an emergency. Shopping, trips with friends, random charges spread across months. None of it discussed. None of it paused when things started slipping. I reminded her that we'd agreed early on to be transparent with money, that shared finances only worked if both people were honest. She laughed, actually laughed, said I was being dramatic and that everyone hides a little spending. Then she gave me the ultimatum again, slower this time, like she was explaining it to a child. I either absorbed the debt and stopped asking questions, or she'd reconsider whether I was someone she could build a life with. No apology, no acknowledgement, just pressure. I went quiet, not because I was processing the numbers, but because something clicked into place. This wasn't about a temporary mistake. This was about entitlement, about her deciding on her own that my stability was hers to spend. I asked if there was anything else I didn't know about. She hesitated for half a second too long, then said no. That hesitation mattered. Over the next hour, more details leaked out without me pushing. A missed payment that had already hit her credit. A friend who'd fronted her cash once and wanted it back. A balance transfer she was hoping I wouldn't notice. Each revelation came with the same defense. She needed support. She deserved understanding. This was just how adult relationships worked. When I said I wasn't comfortable taking responsibility for debt I didn't create or agree to, her patience evaporated. She told me I was being selfish, that I was abandoning her when she needed me most, that if I walked away from this, I was proving I'd never really been serious. I didn't argue. I didn't justify myself. I asked one last question. If the situation were reversed, would she take on my debt without discussion? She didn't answer. She just said that wasn't the point. That was the point. I told her I needed some air and went for a drive. Not to cool off, to think clearly. I replayed the last year in my head, the sudden insistence on nicer dinners, the I'll pay you back later moments that never got revisited, the way she'd brushed off budget conversations as unromantic. By the time I came back, I already knew this wasn't something that would reset with one conversation. She was waiting for me, sitting on the couch, scrolling on her phone like the decision had already been made for both of us. When I said I wasn't agreeing to her terms, she shook her head and said I was making a huge mistake. She told me I'd regret choosing money over love. I went to bed that night without responding. Not because I was unsure, but because I was done negotiating my own boundaries. The next morning I logged into our shared account and separated my portion of the funds. Bills were covered for the month. Everything beyond that was hers to manage. I didn't announce it. I didn't explain it. That was the moment things quietly started to change. She noticed the money separation before she noticed anything else. By noon I had 3 missed calls and a long text asking why the account balance looked wrong. I replied with one sentence. I was no longer covering anything beyond my share of rent and utilities. That's when the tone changed completely. She accused me of blindsiding her, said I was trying to punish her instead of working as a team, told me this was exactly why she hadn't wanted to show me everything in the first place. According to her, my reaction proved I was unsafe when things got hard. When I got home that evening, she was waiting at the kitchen table with her laptop open, spreadsheets pulled up like evidence. She'd reworked the numbers to show how, if I just absorbed the debt temporarily, everything would stabilize in 6 months. She talked fast, like momentum might force agreement. I told her no. Not angrily, not defensively, just no. She leaned back in her chair and said, "So you're really going to let me drown over money you won't even miss?" That wasn't concern. That was leverage. I reminded her that I hadn't agreed to any of this, that hiding it removed my ability to consent. She waved that off and said consent was a technicality when you love someone. That love meant stepping in without being asked. Then she doubled down. She said if I didn't help, she'd have to rethink our future because she needed a partner who could provide stability. She said that calmly, like she was offering me a chance to redeem myself. That was the second time she framed her choices as my responsibility. I realized in that moment that this conversation had an endpoint she'd already chosen. Either I paid or I failed her test. There was no version where my boundary mattered, so I stopped debating. I told her I wasn't taking on her debt, wasn't co-signing anything, and wasn't going to be guilted into fixing a situation I was deliberately kept out of. I said I'd continue paying my share of our shared obligations until the end of the lease period we'd already budgeted for, and nothing more. She stared at me like I'd spoken another language. Then she laughed and said, "You think you can just opt out?" I said yes. That's when she tried a different angle. She softened her voice, talked about stress, about how scared she was. She said she'd felt overwhelmed and didn't know how to tell me. She said if I really loved her, I'd show it now, not later. It might have worked if it hadn't come after threats and ultimatums. I told her my decision wasn't changing, that I wasn't angry, but I was done sharing finances. She stood up, knocked her chair back, and said I was abandoning her. Said I'd regret being this cold when I realized relationships weren't transactional. I didn't respond. I went into the bedroom and started moving my important documents into a backpack. Passport, work laptop, birth certificate. Not to leave immediately, but to remove leverage. She followed me and watched silently, arms crossed. When I zipped the bag, she said, "So that's it? You're just checking out?" I told her I was disengaging financially and emotionally, and that she was free to make whatever decisions she needed to make for herself. That sentence landed harder than yelling ever could. Over the next few days, I kept things neutral, paid my portion of the bills, bought my own groceries, stopped covering shared expenses that had quietly become expected. I didn't argue when she complained. I didn't justify myself when she vented. The first consequence showed up faster than I expected. On Friday, she got a call from her bank while I was in the room. I didn't listen on purpose, but I heard enough. Her minimum payment bounced. A promotional rate expired. Fees stacked instantly. She hung up and slammed her phone on the counter, then looked at me like I was supposed to react. I didn't. That night, she told me she might need to borrow money from a friend just to get through the month. She said it like a warning, like I'd feel responsible. I wished her luck and went to bed. By Sunday, she was sleeping on the couch, not because I asked her to, but because being near me without leverage made her uncomfortable. We moved around each other like roommates who'd already mentally moved on. I could feel the pressure building around her. Deadlines she couldn't delay, calls she couldn't dodge. Reality catching up now that there was no silent safety net underneath it. I stayed calm, detached, consistent, and for the first time since the ultimatum, she stopped telling me what I owed her. Final update. Once the money stopped flowing, everything else unraveled on its own. I didn't change my routine. Went to work, came home, cooked for myself, paid my share on time. I didn't ask questions, didn't check her accounts, didn't offer advice. The distance wasn't dramatic, it was quiet and absolute. She, on the other hand, started living on her phone. Calls during dinner. Messages she stepped into the hallway to take. Long pauses where she stared at the wall like she was doing math she couldn't solve. I caught fragments without trying. Extensions denied. Accounts flagged. A friend who needed repayment sooner than expected. None of it involved me anymore. About 2 weeks after the ultimatum, she came home early one afternoon and went straight into the bedroom. When she came out, her face was tight, eyes flat. She said one of her cards had been closed and the balance was sent to collections. She said it like she was reporting the weather. I nodded and kept folding laundry. She waited for something. Sympathy, anger, a rescue plan. Nothing came. That night she tried one last angle. Sat across from me at the table and said maybe we'd both handled things badly. Said maybe if we reset, went to counseling, pooled resources again, we could fix this together. I asked one question. Was she willing to take full responsibility for her debt without expecting my money? She didn't answer. She just said relationships were about compromise. That was the end of the conversation. The next consequence wasn't financial. It was social. Friends who'd been happy to go out when she was spending freely stopped answering as often. A couple of them quietly asked me what was going on. I didn't vent. I didn't explain. I just said we were handling things separately now. Apparently, she'd already been telling people a version where I'd pulled support out of nowhere. That story didn't hold up when the timeline came out. When people realized how long she'd been hiding things, how much money was involved, invitations slowed, calls dried up. At home, the tension turned into logistics. She asked how long I planned to stay. I told her I'd honor my commitments and then move on. She asked if that meant I was done. I said yes. A week later, she missed rent. Not my portion, hers. The landlord sent a notice to both of us, standard procedure. I forwarded proof of my payment and documented everything. I didn't confront her. I didn't gloat. She panicked. I watched her make frantic calls, offering partial payments, promising timelines she couldn't guarantee. I stayed out of it. The problem existed entirely outside my boundary now. When she realized I wasn't stepping in, something in her shifted. The anger burned out and left exhaustion behind. She stopped accusing me of betrayal and started treating me like a stranger who happened to share space. Boxes appeared in the living room. Not mine. She moved out on a Tuesday morning while I was at work, took what was hers, left the rest. No note, no scene, just empty drawers and silence. The consequences followed her after that. Her credit took a hit that closed doors she hadn't known existed yet. An apartment application fell through. A loan was denied. A job transfer she'd been counting on stalled when a background check flagged financial issues. None of that came back to me. A month later, I got a message from her asking if we could talk, not to reconcile, just to clear the air. I didn't respond. By then, my life was already quieter, cheaper, more predictable. I wasn't carrying someone else's chaos anymore, or waiting for the next hidden problem to surface. I moved out when the lease ended. New place, new routine, no shared accounts, no ultimatums disguised as love. I didn't win anything. I didn't teach her a lesson. I just stopped participating. And without someone else holding it up, everything she'd been balancing in secret collapsed under its own weight. I watched it happen from a distance, hands clean, already gone.